What would you do if the people meant to protect children were the very ones who hurt them? For 4 long years, a paralyzed billionaire grandfather could only watch, heartbroken, as his 2 orphaned grandchildren suffered in silence behind closed doors at the hands of his own daughter's family. Everyone believed he had lost his mind, until the day he spoke again, and the truth tore the family apart. This isn't just a story about cruelty. It's about a promise kept with every breath of his remaining life. Tell us in the comments, if you had only one chance to speak after years of silence, what truth would you tell first? Rain whispered against the windows of the Parker mansion, a steady rhythm that filled the silence Walter Hayes had been trapped in for months. Once a gentle engineer with a sharp mind and steady hands, he now sat in a wheelchair by the window, his face pale, his body stiff, his words locked inside him. The stroke had taken his voice, but not his thoughts. Inside they screamed. It had been only 6 months since the accident, the twisted wreck of a black sedan that took the lives of his beloved son and daughter-in-law. Their children, Emma and Noah, were all he had left. When the court granted custody to his daughter, Helen, and her husband, Richard, Walter had believed, or wanted to believe, that they would raise the children with love. At first, things looked normal. Helen spoke softly when visitors came. She posted photos of family dinners online, smiling beside the children. But when the guests left, her smile disappeared. "Don't make a mess," she would hiss at the kids. "Eat what's left from the table." Richard barely looked at them, his attention always buried in his phone, or the stock reports that seemed more alive to him than any child's laughter. Walter saw everything, through the reflection of rain on the glass, through the mirror of helpless eyes. Emma, only 8, was already learning to protect her brother, to comfort him when the shouting began. Noah clung to her sleeve like a frightened bird. Sometimes, Helen would close Walter's bedroom door and whisper to her husband in the hall, "He doesn't even understand anymore. He's lost." But Walter understood every word. He understood, and it burned. At night, Maria, the housemaid, would quietly bring him tea in a blanket. She never asked questions, but the way her eyes met his, kind, steady, unafraid, told him she knew. Outside, thunder rolled across the Seattle sky. Walter's breath came slow and shallow. Through the fogged glass, he saw Emma huddled on the porch, wrapping her tiny arms around Noah, trying to shield him from the rain. Their clothes were thin. No one called them inside. Tears welled in Walter's eyes as his fingers trembled against the wheelchair's armrest. He wanted to shout, to run, to hold them close, but his body betrayed him. He closed his eyes and prayed in silence. "If I ever speak again," he vowed in the hollow of his heart, "I will protect them, no matter what it costs." And somewhere deep inside that still body, a spark began to stir. 4 years had passed since the night of rain and silent vows. The Parker mansion still looked perfect from the outside. Trimmed hedges, glowing windows, and the gentle hum of laughter whenever neighbors dropped by. Helen would open the door with a warm smile, her hand resting gracefully on her husband's arm. "Father Walter sometimes forgets things," she'd say sweetly, her tone laced with practiced patience. "But I'm always here to care for him. And the children, oh, they're our joy. We love them like our own." The neighbors would nod, charmed by the illusion. But when the door closed, the air inside changed. The warmth vanished. "Those leftovers are enough for the kids," Helen snapped one evening, stacking her plate high with the best cuts of roast. "No need to waste money from the fund." Richard grunted without looking up from his phone. They should be grateful they're even under this roof. I won't have them embarrassing us again. Emma, now 12, quietly gathered the scraps onto 2 small plates. She had learned the art of silence, how to move softly, breathe quietly, exist without being noticed. Noah, only 9, sat beside her, eyes downcast, fingers fidgeting under the table. He no longer cried. Crying made things worse. Upstairs, in the room that used to belong to him, Walter Hayes sat by the window. The stroke had left him trapped in his own body, the family claiming he was confused, forgetful. But inside, his mind was sharp as ever. He could hear the shouting. He could see the bruises. Only one person in the house dared to acknowledge the truth. Maria, the housemaid who had served the family for years. Her hands trembled as she folded laundry, not from age, but from fear of what she saw daily. She had begun recording on her old phone. Helen's voice yelling, Noah's sobs muffled behind doors, the fading marks on Emma's small arms. Every night, she slipped into Walter's room, pretending to tidy up. But really, she was checking on him. And he knew. His eyes followed her, pleading, urging. One night, Maria paused at the doorway. Walter's gaze caught hers. Slowly, deliberately, he blinked twice. Her breath hitched. It was their secret signal, the only way he could speak. Keep going, it meant. Don't let them hide what they've done. Maria nodded faintly, clutching her phone to her chest. The silence of that house was full of screams no one else could hear. The storm came without warning that night. Wind whipping through the tall pines, rain striking the windows like restless fingers. Maria had just finished tidying the kitchen when she heard the sound. Small, desperate footsteps echoing down the hallway. The door burst open. Noah stood there, trembling, his little body soaked from head to toe. "Grandpa," he whispered, his voice quivering. Behind him, Helen's angry shouting still echoed from the staircase. Walter's heart clenched. His hand, the one he could still move, reached out, shaking as it brushed against the boy's wet sleeve. Noah crawled into his lap, curling against his chest, seeking warmth and safety that had long been denied to him. Maria appeared a moment later, closing the door quietly. Her eyes met Walter's, and for the first time, she saw something different in his expression. Not just sorrow, but determination. He tried to speak. His lips parted, air trembled through them, but only a faint rasp came out. The sound of wind trapped in a broken instrument. Maria's breath caught. She dropped to her knees beside him. "It's okay," she whispered. "Try again." He did. Again and again, until the whisper turned into a sound, rough, fragile, but human. Maria's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't a word yet, but it was hope. From that night on, every afternoon became a secret lesson. Maria brought flashcards, old books, and patience that only kindness could teach. Walter repeated syllables slowly, sometimes failing, sometimes managing half a word. His throat burned, but his will was stronger than pain. Weeks passed. The seasons began to turn. And as his voice grew steadier, Maria took the next step. She brought the truth into the light. She met quietly with Benjamin Crow, an old lawyer friend of Walter's, who had once trusted him with his own family's estate. She showed him the videos, the bruises, the ledgers. Numbers didn't lie. Over 70% of the inheritance meant for Emma and Noah had vanished, siphoned away by Helen and Richard through shell accounts and household expenses. When Benjamin looked up from the papers, his face was pale. "We'll need to move carefully," he said. "But this is criminal." That evening, as rain returned, Walter sat by the window with Maria at his side. The wind rattled the glass, just as it had that first night. But now, something different stirred within him. A voice. Fragile yet clear, he turned toward her, eyes bright with a fire that had waited 4 years to speak. His lips moved, and this time, the words came. They hurt my grandchildren. The storm outside seemed to pause, as if listening, as if the house itself finally heard the truth it had silenced for too long. The courthouse smelled faintly of rain and old wood, the kind of scent that carried memories. Emma sat quietly beside Maria, her hands trembling, while Noah clung to her sleeve. Across the aisle, Helen dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Your Honor," she began, "I've cared for these children for years. I treated them like my own. I don't know why my father or that woman." She glanced toward Maria, her tone sharp, "would say such horrible lies about me." Her husband, Richard, nodded solemnly. "We gave them everything: roof, food, education. Maybe we were strict, but never cruel." He sighed, lowering his head as if carrying a burden too noble for this world. The courtroom murmured softly, sympathetic eyes turning toward them. Until Benjamin Crow rose, calm but unyielding. "Your Honor," he said, "we ask permission to present the evidence." The judge nodded. The lights dimmed, and the screen flickered to life. At first, there was only static, then a shaky image of a kitchen, Helen's voice cutting through the silence. "Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about." A child's sob followed. Emma's small, frightened voice. "Please, don't hit my brother again." Then came the sound everyone would remember, a sharp, echoing slap. The courtroom went utterly still. Helen's face drained of color. Richard froze, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Emma buried her face into Maria's shoulder. Benjamin's voice broke the silence. "These are only some of the recordings Mrs. Maria Lopez took while employed in the Parker household. They show consistent abuse, neglect, and misuse of funds meant for these children." Helen tried to speak, but her words stumbled over tears. It's not what it looks like. I was under stress." Walter Hayes rose slowly from his wheelchair. His hands shook as he gripped the armrests, his voice gravelly but firm. "No, I saw it. I saw everything. For 4 years I was silent. And silence." He paused, breath trembling. "Silence was my greatest sin." The courtroom held its breath. Helen collapsed back into her chair, her face ghost white. Then Emma broke from her seat, running toward her grandfather. She threw her arms around him, sobbing. Maria covered her face with both hands, tears spilling freely. And in that moment, for the first time in years, truth filled the room. Heavy, painful, but finally free. The morning light poured gently through the courthouse windows, painting the oak benches in gold. The air felt different that day. Lighter, expectant. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Walter Hayes sat quietly, his trembling hands folded on his lap, Emma and Noah by his side. The verdict came after what felt like an eternity. The court hereby transfers full guardianship of Emma and Noah Hayes to their grandfather, Mr. Walter Hayes. Furthermore, Helen and Richard Parker are to be prosecuted for child abuse and embezzlement of inheritance funds. A hush fell over the courtroom, followed by a low murmur. Helen covered her face, sobbing, but no one reached to comfort her. Richard lowered his head, the mask of control slipping at last. Benjamin Crow placed a hand on Walter's shoulder. "You did it," he whispered. "You gave them their life back." Outside, News crews waited on the courthouse steps. By evening, every television in Seattle carried the same headline: Paralyzed grandfather wins justice with his own voice. Reporters spoke about the miracle of recovery, the courage of a child, and the quiet strength of an old man who refused to give up. But Walter didn't watch the news. He sat by the window of the hospital rehab center, eyes on the children chasing sunlight in the courtyard. That was the only story he cared about. A week later, the social welfare department helped move the family into a small, cozy house by Green Lake. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs. Maria unpacked dishes while humming softly, and Emma helped Noah hang drawings on the walls, suns, trees, and a stick figure of a man in a wheelchair, smiling. In the evenings, laughter filled the air again. Walter practiced his speech with Maria's patient guidance, each word a small victory. Good morning. Love you. Thank you. His voice was still rough, but warmer than it had ever been. That night, as the fire crackled and the moonlight shimmered on the lake, Walter sat surrounded by the children. He lifted his chin, trying the last word his therapist had given him. His lips trembled, then parted, and the word came, soft but clear. Home. Finally. Emma leaned her head on his arm. Yes, Grandpa, she whispered. We're home. Years slipped by gently, like pages turning in a well-loved book. The lake house had aged gracefully, its white porch now covered in ivy, wind chimes singing softly with each breeze. Inside, laughter often mingled with the scent of coffee and old books. Walter Hayes sat by the window, his hair now completely white, his face lined but peaceful. Time had not dulled the brightness in his eyes, it had only softened it. The children he once feared would be lost to cruelty were now young adults, standing strong in the light he had fought to give them. Emma, now 18, moved gracefully across the room, a woman in both poise and purpose. She was a psychology student at the University of Washington, studying trauma and healing, because she understood both better than most. Under her grandfather's watchful eye and Benjamin Crow's steady mentorship, she helped form the Hayes Foundation, a nonprofit for children who had suffered abuse or been denied their inheritance rights. On the day of the foundation's launch, the house buzzed with quiet excitement. Volunteers prepared banners, and Maria, still spry despite her years, fussed over Emma's hair, muttering about it needing a bit more shine for the cameras. Noah, now 15, practiced a melody in the corner, his fingers gliding over the piano keys. Music had become his refuge, and his gift to others. Every Saturday, he visited the Children's Center downtown, teaching them songs that spoke of safety, laughter, and light. As guests gathered on the porch, Benjamin gave a short speech about courage, the kind that doesn't roar but whispers. Try again tomorrow. Emma then stepped forward, holding a folder with trembling hands. Walter watched her lips move, clear, confident, full of grace. This foundation, she said, is built from love, from pain, and from the promise that no child should ever feel unseen again. Applause filled the room, and Maria brushed away a tear with the corner of her apron. Walter's gaze lingered on his granddaughter. The little girl who once sat in the rain, now standing in the light of her own making. As Emma signed the founding documents, Walter's eyes softened. A gentle smile formed on his lips, the same smile that had survived every storm. He whispered, almost to himself, I kept my promise. Winter came quietly that year, wrapping Seattle in soft mist and gentle snow. The lake behind the Hayes house froze over, glimmering beneath the pale morning sun. Inside, a small fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth spreading through the living room where 3 generations of love had once gathered. Walter Hayes lay peacefully in his bed, the faint rhythm of his breathing mingling with the hush of the winter wind. His hands, once trembling with pain, now steady in rest, were clasped between Emma and Noah's. The siblings sat silently, their eyes red but calm, as though they understood that this was not an ending, but a homecoming. When morning broke, the light touched his face like a blessing. Walter had drifted away in his sleep, a soft smile still resting on his lips. On his bedside table lay a sealed envelope, addressed in his careful handwriting, "To my grandchildren." Emma opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a short letter, written in the same uneven script that had once learned to speak again. "If there's one thing I learned after a lifetime of silence," the letter began, "it's that love doesn't need to shout to be heard. It only needs to be lived and passed on." Tears rolled down Emma's cheeks, but she smiled through them. Noah took her hand, and together they read the final line. "Keep speaking for those who can't. That's how you'll keep my voice alive." Years passed. The Hayes Foundation grew, spreading its reach far beyond what any of them had imagined. Newspapers wrote about scholarships, rescue missions, and homes rebuilt for children who had lost everything. On the 10th anniversary of the foundation, a ceremony was held at the university auditorium. Emma, now a poised young woman, stood before the crowd, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "My grandfather didn't just teach me how to speak," she said softly. "He taught me how to listen to the cries the world ignores." As applause rose like a wave, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, landing gently on a bronze plaque at the entrance. It read, "He kept his promise." Spring arrived quietly, as it always did. Not with thunder, but with forgiveness. The lake that once froze in silence now rippled beneath soft sunlight. A single daffodil pushed through the last patch of snow by the porch, stubborn and golden. Emma stood there, the wind brushing her hair, feeling the warmth on her face. Somewhere, she could almost hear her grandfather's voice. Gentle, steady, eternal. Love doesn't end. It just changes form. And as the snow melted into the earth, it didn't disappear. It became life again.